Thanks, man.
Appreciate
it. Let me grab this from you. I'm good.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
good.
How we doing? So, let's start here. We can turn that down a little bit.
That went smooth.
So a couple of months ago, I was traveling to Orlando, Florida. I was going to give a speech, and I remember I came on the airplane. I sat down, I found my seat, and I was seated next to a woman who I would have described as a business executive. She looked the part. She had on a great business suit. She had her laptop open. She was working before we even took off. I, on the other hand, that day, I was wearing a t-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops. I probably looked like I was headed to the beach or to Disney World. And as I sat down, she started the conversation. I don't know, the way that most people would start a conversation in that situation. She said, "Are you headed to Orlando for business or pleasure?" And I said, "I'm headed for business. How about for you?" And she said, "For business." And then she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a keynote speaker. I'm speaking at an association conference tomorrow." And then she looked me from head to toe, and she asked me a very blunt question. She said, "Why in the world would anyone hire you to speak to them?" I was kind of offended for a minute, and I looked at her and I said, "'Cause I'm amazing?" And she laughed, and we had a great conversation. I'm actually speaking to her company soon. The reason I tell you that story is as we begin this conversation today, I want to start with a really blunt question for you. Why in the world would anyone buy from you? You're entertaining? Fantastic. That's part of it, right? But think about it. You're all here to take your sales to another level. You're here to learn something, to meet new people, to grab onto new ideas so that you can go back and you can be more effective in what you do every single day at every single door. And so what I want to share with you today is one of the skill sets that I think is so essential to being able to sell efficiently, to being able to build a connection, to being able to move people, and that is the skill of storytelling. How many of you would say that you're a great storyteller? Okay? Storytelling is such an essential skill when it comes to sales because it does so many things. So let's think about it for a minute. What do stories do? For those who are up front, give me some ideas. What do stories do for people? They inspire people, absolutely. They engage people from an emotional standpoint. They might inspire them to move, to take action, right? What else do they do? They can make people laugh. There can be an entertainment value in that story. Absolutely. What else? It creates the connections. They're relatable. They teach people. Stories engage people at an emotional level. And think about it. As human beings, we are emotional creatures. And so, yes, you have to have logic in your product pitch, in the things that you're presenting. But people buy based on what? Emotion. People take action based on emotion. People move based on emotion. And so if you want to sell more people, you need to bring that emotional element into it. And the best tool we have at our disposal is stories. Stories, I believe, are the most underrated skill in business. And it's interesting that I share about stories. I've written about storytelling because what led me to do what I do today and to talk about storytelling was actually my inability to tell stories. Sam mentioned in my introduction that my background is as an entrepreneur. When I was 21 years old, my brother Scott and I started a business together. Scott was a lot older, he was a lot wiser, he had more experience. He was 22 at the time. And, the truth is we were young, naive entrepreneurs, and we started this business, and I'd love to tell you that it took off like a rocket, but it didn't. We had ups and downs of building that business, just like everybody has ups and downs of building a business. But in August of 2003, that month was really life-changing for me. Life-changing for a couple of reasons. Number one, I got married that month, and that was life-changing in and of itself. I remember we got married. My wife and I were both going to school full-time. She was studying something. I was studying entrepreneurship, and so I'd started a business on the side because I thought that was the point of studying entrepreneurship, right? And so we got married. We went on our honeymoon. We moved back to go back to school. We moved into this tiny little one-bedroom apartment. Like when I say tiny, I mean like everything was one bedroom, I think. The bathroom, like it was all just one bedroom, right? It was just poor college student living. Our rent in that apartment was $600. We had normal costs of books, tuition, living. We shared one car between the two of us. And I tell you that because I remember the day that we moved into that apartment, my brother called me. And he said, "Hey, I just want to let you know I transferred some money into your account." And I said, "Thank you, I appreciate it." And he said, "Just so you know, we only made $800 this month, And so I transferred $400 into your account. Now, this was 11 months into our business, and I am sure that this is not the best month we had ever had. I don't think it was the worst month we had ever had, but this was the first time I was going to have to be accountable to somebody. I was going to have to tell my brand new bride, hey, guess what? I only made $400. Stupid choice, but you're stuck. You know, like I didn't know how to have this conversation. I just was like, what do I say? And so I sat down with my wife, Sarah, and I just kind of blurted it out. I said, hey, we only made $400 this month. And she had a normal reaction. She goes, that doesn't even cover our rent. Are we going to be okay? And I said, yeah, I mean, we had some savings and things. And as I sat and I talked to Sarah, here's the truth. I felt like I was trying, but I was failing. I was talking to a lot of people. I was knocking a lot of doors. I was out there trying, but I wasn't getting people to respond to me. I wasn't influencing them. I wasn't causing them to take action. They weren't buying from me. And so I felt like I was failing. And Sarah, in her wisdom, asked me 2 questions that really changed my life. She said, okay, for just a second, I want you to kind of step back, remove the emotion, if you will. Do you still believe you can make this business work? And I said, yeah. And sometimes, to be honest, in the sales process, in what you do every day, sometimes it feels like it's not working, doesn't it? Sometimes it feels like you want to quit. Sometimes you feel like you're just beating your head against the wall. And events like this are a chance for you to step back and to go, okay, do I still buy into it? Do I still think I can make this work? And hopefully you gain some perspective from the next couple of days to be able to go, yeah, I'm going to go after it. Then she asked me the tough question. Then she said, okay, to get from where you are then to where you want to go, what needs to change? I hate that question. Don't you hate that question? Because I was like, everyone else, everything else, I don't know, everybody else. But I needed to change. I needed to figure out how to communicate in a way that I could move people, how to connect. And so I made a decision that night that I was going to do everything that I could to master my ability to communicate. I started to read books like crazy. I started to go to seminars. I started to study great salespeople. I started to reach out and try and grow myself just like you are being here. I commend you for that. I think it's an incredible thing. This was before podcasts where I would buy all the tapes and listen to everybody that I could, right? I'll tell you the thing that helped me the very most is I started to record every presentation that I gave. Have you ever done that before? Is that not the worst experience of your life? It's horrible. First off, my voice sounds so much deeper in my head. Like, I don't know what you're hearing, but to me, this is fantastic. It sounds incredible. The first presentation I ever recorded, 15-minute sales presentation, no joke, I said 144 times. I counted. I mean, what was I selling? Like, there was no confidence. It wasn't clear. It was obvious to me why people weren't buying from me when I first heard it. I went, oh, well, that makes sense. And so I started to work on it. And I started to try and develop my ability. And one of the things that I would ask as I listened to those recordings, hundreds of hours of those recordings, is I would ask a simple question: what caused people to engage? Like, what did they respond to? Why did they engage? And inevitably, when they engaged, it was when I was telling stories. And so I kind of honed in on that and said, okay, I want to focus on that. I want to get better at telling stories. And so I studied everything that I could around storytelling. And as simple as this sounds, as I got better, our business got better. People responded more. They bought from me. We started to grow that business. And the long story short of it is we grew that business to over $25 million in annual revenue while still in our 20s. Yeah, I'll cheer for that. Absolutely. And in the process of building that business, I found for me what I truly love to do, and that's this. I did a lot of speaking and training for our sales team as we started to grow, and I just fell in love with this idea of speaking, and it's led me to writing 4 books, and I get to speak to hundreds of audiences all around the world in all sorts of different industries, and it's an honor to be here to be part of this event. I love doing this. So as I started speaking, my natural bent as a speaker is as a storyteller. I share stories all the time. And I started to have people who would ask me to coach them on presentation skills, on speaking, and specifically storytelling. And so I started to break down the process. And what it led me to write is this book called The Power of Storytelling. This is the book that I wish I had when I was 21 years old, because there's lots of books out there on storytelling, but I wanted somebody to break it down, like teach it as a skill, break down the process. How do you craft a story? How do you put it together? What parts do you put in? What do you put out? How do you add dialogue and narration and make characters come alive? And all the things that you want to really develop this skill. And so we're going to dive into it right now. You guys ready? Okay, I break storytelling down into 3 parts: the mindset, the skill set, and the tool set. First off, we have to have the approach right, or our ability to connect just won't happen. Second, the skill set. We're going to break down, there's a process to storytelling. There is a model. I will teach it to you. I'll show you the nuances of it, and it's really simple, but we miss it. And then the tool set. How do you make stories come alive? How do you make stories more compelling, more dynamic, more memorable? And I'll share with you some of those tools so that we can do that. So let's start with the mindset. How many of you have ever read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Okay, great book. Lots of hands went up. 7 Habits was named as the #1 business book of the 21st century. Over 30 million copies have been sold. Incredible book. If you haven't read it, like right after you read mine, that would be a great book for you to read. 7 Habits was written by a man named Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey unfortunately passed away about 5.5 years ago. Stephen Covey was a mentor of mine. I live here in Utah, and Stephen lived in Utah. His family still lives here. And as I was transitioning from building our business to going into writing and to speaking, I had a chance to meet and get to know and learn from Stephen Covey, one of the most incredible men, I think, who has ever lived. The first time I ever met Stephen Covey was in 2006. He was hosting a political event at his home, and a mutual friend invited me to the event with the purpose of meeting Stephen Covey. And so after I made a large donation, I was invited to go to the event. And I went to this event, and you go in, and Stephen Covey has this big, beautiful home on the side of the mountain. And you walk in, and I'm looking around. It's like the who's who of Utah, which, as I said that out loud, kind of sounds funny. But, you know, like the governor's standing over there, and these CEOs, all these business people that you recognize. And my wife and I are kind of mingling, and after a few minutes, my friend Kevin comes over, and he goes, "Ty, let me introduce you to Stephen." So he walks me over to Stephen Covey. This is one of my heroes, right? This is, I mean, somebody, I've read his books, I looked up to. This is somebody that I could not wait to meet. And Kevin introduced me to Stephen Covey by saying, "Stephen, this is Ty Bennett. Ty's writing a book." And Stephen was very gracious. He goes, "Ty, nice to meet you. Thank you for coming." He goes, "What's the title of your book?" And I said, "It's called The Power of Influence." It was my first book. And he goes, "That's a great title." He goes, "Can I give you some advice?" This is Stephen Covey. And I was like, "Yeah. Can I write it down? Can I record this?" And this is what he said. He said, "Ty, make sure you write the book for the reader, not the writer." I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he said, "You know, a book that's written for the writer to build themselves up for their own ego," he said, "that book, it's just not going to make that big of an impact. But a book that's written for the reader to teach, to inspire, to help people," he said, "that book will be a home run." And then it's like he got this train of thought going. He goes, "You know, Ty, I'm a lot older than you." At that point, he was in his late 60s. I was in my late 20s. He goes, "You know, I think we go through life and we think life is about achievement, right? What's the next goal? What's the next step? What's the next thing that I can achieve?" He said, "Maybe it's with age, but somewhere you figure out that life, it's actually about contribution. It's about how can I give? How can I serve? How can I help people?" That was my very first conversation with Stephen Covey. And to me, it was life-changing. Because yes, what he shared was great advice if you're going to write a book, but what he talked about was something bigger than that. I think what he was saying is that your focus is on the audience. Now for you, your focus is literally on the person on the other side of that door, right? For me, my focus is on the audience sitting in front of me. If you're in sales, it's about your prospect. If you're in leadership, it's about your people. If you're a teacher, it's about your students. That's how it works. And yet we screw up so often in building a connection because we make it all about us, don't we? I'll give you a simple example of how we do this. How many of you ever get nervous right before you knock a door, right before you're going to give a presentation? How many of you, if we're being honest with each other, how many of you have a fear or get nervous before giving a speech or presentation? Right? That's pretty normal, right? They say people fear speaking more than they fear death, which is weird. But there's actually a legitimate reason why that is. Do you want to know why that is? It's because you're still alive after you give a really bad speech. That's why that is. Like, you have to deal with that afterwards. Here's the thing. When you're nervous, where's your focus? It's on you, right? If I walk up on stage and I'm nervous, I'm focused on me, I'm asking questions like, okay, what am I going to say? Hope my PowerPoint's okay. Is my fly down? Like all these things that are me-centric. If I focus on you, if you focus on the audience, you ask different questions. And different questions create different emotions. You walk out and you say, okay, what can I share that can help these people? How do I build a connection? Right? Different experience. And a lot of those nerves start to dissipate. I also think we go into every presentation with the wrong goal. And what I mean by that is you knock on a door, at the end of I believe your goal for everybody in here, whether you've thought about it this way or not, your goal is perfection, isn't it? You want it to be perfect. You want to ask the right questions. You want to build that connection. You want them to buy from you. You want it to be perfect. Here's the problem. Have you ever given or even seen a perfect presentation? Guys, they don't exist. This is what I do for a living. I give 100 speeches a year, and I promise you, some of them feel incredible, and many of them are videotaped just like this one, and I'll leave a speech going, that was unbelievable, and then I'll watch it a couple weeks later, and I'm like, what? That's not the same speech I remember. Because I screw up just like everybody else. I say things that don't make sense. I start over my words. All the things that you screw up. But why did it feel perfect? Here's the thing. I realized a long time ago that if we want to really move people forward, we have to shift our goal. It's not perfection, it's connection. Because when you make a connection, all those imperfections don't matter. I used to go on sales calls with our guys. I would just go along and shadow them and watch them. And I would listen to how they presented. And some of the new ones, I would sit there going, that's not even true. He's just making stuff up. This is bizarre, right? And yet, somehow that connection worked and those people would still buy from him. Because that connection is what binds you. It's what moves things forward. It's what builds the relationship. I think business is about relationships, isn't it? You have to build those relationships. That connection is huge. And so I think from a presenting standpoint, from an influence standpoint, you have one purpose. That purpose is engagement. Think about it. You knock on a door, you've got to engage them. You've got to somehow build that rapport really, really quickly. You've got to be able to get them to open up. You've got to be able to build trust and have them feel comfortable with you. Engagement is key because here's the thing. Without engagement, there's never any influence. I promise you, if you're sitting here not paying attention to me, at the end of this, you're not going to go, oh, I'm going to go do what he just said. It doesn't happen that way. I have to engage you, which means I have to be able to ask the right questions. I have to be able to tell the right stories. I have to be able to use all of the tools of engagement that you have at your disposal to make you laugh, to make you think, all those things to be able to engage you so that I can influence you. So you think about it. Your focus is on the audience. Your goal is not perfection, it's connection. Your purpose is to engage them. Now, I think there's a balance. I think for all of us, there's a balance that we have to find. The balance is between relatability and credibility. Here's what I mean by that. On one hand, if people don't view you as credible, they will not care what you have to say. It's true, right? If you don't have the answers to their questions, if you don't know your product well, if you don't have that credibility piece, it's really hard to sell. On the other hand, if people don't view you as relatable, they won't respond. If they don't know you, like you, trust you, feel comfortable with you, they're not going to say, I don't like that guy, let's buy his stuff. It's just not how it works, right? And so there's a balance here. How many of you have ever heard the golden rule of business? The golden rule of business says that people do business with people they know, like, and trust. Have you heard that before? As a 21-year-old, I kept reading that golden rule, and I kept thinking, that is not true. Because here's the thing, I was talking to people and they seemed to know me, they seemed to like me, they seemed to trust me, they felt comfortable with me, they weren't dodging my phone calls, and yet they weren't buying from me. And I was like, what am I missing? And it's that credibility piece. It was that value piece, right? To be able to, I think people do business with people they know, like, trust, and value. You bring solutions to people, that's what sales is. You provide products and services that enhance people's life and make them better. That's value you have to provide. So I was struggling to get people to respond to me, to get people to move forward, and I couldn't figure out why. And so I reached out to a friend, a mentor, who was a successful entrepreneur. He was in his early 50s, and I asked him to go to lunch. And I sat down and I explained the situation and just said, this is what I'm doing, and it's not working. I don't know what to do. Just give me some advice. I'll do anything. What should I do? And he said, Ty, I want you to go to the last 5 people who told you no, and I want you to ask them why. And I was like, I'll do anything but that. Like, what else? Any other ideas? Or Have you guys ever done this before? This was the scariest proposition of my life. I was like, what would I even say? And he kind of coached me through it, and so I did. I went back to these last 5 people, kind of hat in hand, and I just said, look, I just want your help. I want to know the truth, even if it hurts. What am I doing wrong? Like, why did you say no? I would love to get better, and so if you would be willing to tell me the truth, I would love to understand it. And all 5 of them told me the truth. And some of it hurt. And they said several things, but all 5 of them said the same thing. They said, Ty, it's your age. At the time I was 21, I probably looked like I was 12. And some of you are like, you still do. But I'm 37, so back off. Here's the thing. As dumb as this sounds, I had never thought about that before. I was just young enough and just cocky enough. I had no idea that was an objection in somebody's mind. And so I went back to this mentor and I said, it's my age. And he goes, I know. I was like, really? We had to do that? And he goes, you needed to hear it. And I said, okay, so what do I do? And he goes, I don't know. And I was like, what kind of mentor are you? Like, help me out, man. And he goes, okay, what did other young entrepreneurs do? What did Bill Gates do? What did Steve Jobs do? And as soon as he said Bill Gates, I had this idea. And it's an idea that I turned into a story. Where's my friend Tommy? Tommy, come on up here. Give Tommy a hand as he's coming up here. Come here, Tommy. Come on up on the side stairs over here. I'm going to put you right up here in one of these chairs, my friend. This way. Tommy, where are you going, dude? Thanks. Come have a seat. So here's the truth, Tommy. You are the oldest person I could find in the audience. That's the truth. Way to be here. We had a great conversation. He's getting ready to retire and just going to kill it for a year before he does. Good for you. So here's the thing. I would sit down with people like Tommy who were older than me, they're more successful than me, they had more experience than me, and now for the first time I realized that Tommy was probably looking at me going, why would I listen to this kid? Before, I didn't know that was an objection, and so I would just talk and talk and talk, and he probably didn't listen to anything that I said. Have you guys ever heard the saying, the elephant in the room? Have you heard that saying? What do we typically do with the elephant in the room? We ignore it. We pretend it's not there. We figure like it's not going to be a big deal. For just a second, like imagine the literal interpretation of the elephant in the room. The Hogle Zoo is just right down the street, right? Let's say all the animals escaped and the elephants made their way to the Salt Palace because it's big, it's open, right? Let's pretend for just a second there's like an elephant right there, like huge tusk, trunk, like literally an elephant. I would have to say something, wouldn't I? I'd have to be like, I don't know, Tommy, there's an elephant. Do you want to pet it? Like, I don't know what we do. It would be bizarre if I didn't say something. And so the first thing out of my mouth, I'd sit down and I'd go, Tommy, I kind of feel like a young Bill Gates. And he gave me the nicest response I ever got because he just looked at me with this inquisitive look like, interesting. Some people laughed out loud. Some people are like, what? Like, I wanted him to respond that way. I wanted to engage him. And I go, here's what I mean. If you remember, Bill Gates was 19 when he dropped out of school. And at the time, computers were huge. They were the size of refrigerators, right? They were super expensive. And Bill Gates went around and told everybody he was going to put a personal computer in every home in the world. People probably thought he was nuts. Who's this young, naive entrepreneur? No idea what he's talking about, right? Here's the thing, Tommy. I'm not saying I'm going to be as rich as Bill Gates is. And I'm not saying I'm going to change the world the same way Bill Gates has. But I do know that I have something here. And I'm just asking you to take a serious look. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah.
You see, that little story, told thousands and thousands of times, quite literally built a multi-million-dollar business. So when I talk about storytelling, the reason that I'm passionate about storytelling is because this story that I just told you changed the course of my career. I would not be standing on the stage if I hadn't learned to tell that story. I would not have built a multi-million-dollar business and gone on to write books and be able to speak to audiences all over the world if I hadn't learned that story. And so stories have power. They can change things for you if we learn how to tell those stories well. Tommy, here's a copy of my book, The Power of Storytelling. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming up here. What a good sport. I walked in this morning and I was like, oh shoot, nobody's going to be older than me. Not a single person. So luckily, Tommy's here. Great. All right, so let's dive into stories. Let's talk about the skill set. Let's talk about what they are. Because if we can understand stories at a different level, if we can understand how to break them down, how to dissect them, then we can deliver them even more effectively. Here's my definition of a story. A story is a reimagined experience narrated with enough detail and feeling to cause your listener's imagination to experience it as real. Think about it. We don't tell a story for us, we tell a story for them. And so what I'm saying is if I can tell a story in a way that engages you emotionally, your imagination, mentally, if you're engaged in the story, if you feel it, you're more likely to experience it and therefore act on it. That aha moment, right? If you're using a story to validate your product, then the takeaway, the solution is, oh, I need that product, right? If you're using a story to share how working with you is a great experience, then they're like, okay, that's what I'm looking for, that's what I need, right? So here's the foundation for influential storytelling, and this is crucial. You don't retell a story, you relive a story. Because there's a huge difference between the two. When you relive a story, you allow other people in to relive it with you. When you relive a story, it allows people to experience it and feel it. It's a different experience if I would have told you about meeting Stephen Covey, but I didn't. I relived meeting Stephen Covey so that you could have that experience, right? There's a nuance to it. So the next question I get from people is, okay, Ty, that's great. How do you relive a story? Well, let's start here. I want you to think about a story that you tell. Everybody has stories that you tell on a regular basis. You probably have client success stories that you tell at virtually every door. You probably have stories about the process of working with you that you tell. You probably have stories that you tell in recruiting, whatever it is. I want you to get that story in your mind. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to teach you 3 techniques that are going to bring the audience into the story. I'm not going to change the story, but I'm going to change the way the audience experiences it by simply adding a couple of techniques, okay? This is where the rubber meets the road. If you're taking notes, this is where you want to take notes. So before you tell a story, the first thing I want you to think about is, how do I create curiosity? Because here's the truth. Curiosity is a storyteller's best friend. And as hard as this is to hear, the truth is no one cares about your story. Like not even your mom. Nobody at all. Unless they see how it pertains to them. That's just how we work as human beings, whether it's conscious or subconscious. If I say, let me tell you a story, in the back of your mind, you're kind of going, eh. So here's how you fix that. Before you jump into a story, you ask a you-focused question on the front end of a story. A you-focused question means the word you is in the question. Here's how this works. I'm going to tap into your world with a question, and then I'm going to bring you into my world with a story. So as I'm sitting down, instead of me jumping in and saying, let me tell you a story about this, I'm going to say, has this ever happened to you? And they're like, oh my gosh, all the time. It's interesting because boom, and now you're right with me in that story. A few minutes ago, I told you a story about Stephen Covey. Before I did that, I asked, how many of you have ever read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Virtually every hand in here went up. Why was I asking that question? Because now there's a commonality for that story to have relevance in your life, right? Now it makes sense. Now, just for a second, let's dissect that for a minute. Give a little thought to the you-focused questions that you ask. I have found through trial and error that asking about 7 habits is a better question than asking about Stephen Covey. Do you realize my story had nothing to do with 7 habits? It was about Stephen Covey, who was the author, right? But in a business setting, if I were to ask how many have read 7 habits, I get more hands, more response than how many of you know Stephen Covey. It's a better question. I could have asked other questions. I could have said, how many of you have ever met one of your heroes? That would have worked. I could have said, how many of you ever had a conversation that changed your whole perspective? That could have worked. I could have said, how many of you have ever donated to a politician for no reason? Like that. I mean, there's lots of leading questions you could use, right, for that story. So before you jump in, you're going to ask a you-focused question, and then you're going to jump into the story. Once you do, you're going to place them in the scene. This is done one of 2 ways. You can say, if you had been there when, or you can say, imagine being here. I want to physically place you in the scene so that you can start to picture it and see it because I want you to relive it. So let me give you an example. I could tell you a story that, well, I could say, man, I don't know if you've ever had to interview somebody, but the first time I ever had to interview somebody, I was so nervous. I'm sitting behind my desk, my knees are shaking, the person's walking in, I still don't know what I'm going to ask them. Okay, pause right there for just a second. What are you picturing in your mind? What are you seeing? Are you picturing yourself at a desk? You're starting to create it. By simply saying, if you had been there when, or imagine being here, I'm engaging you in a co-creation process. This is why when you read a book, sometimes you're disappointed in the movie because the vision in your mind is different, right? You're like, that's stupid. Jack Reacher is way taller than Tom Cruise. Like, why did they cast? That doesn't even make sense. Like, how does Tom Cruise fight all these guys? Or whatever the situation is, right? So I'm going to place you in the scene by just saying, imagine being here, right? Imagine this situation. Simple technique, but it makes a world of difference. Third technique is this. I want you to reinforce relatability. You reinforce relatability by having a conversational tone in the way that you speak. You throw it back on the audience. You say things like, do you know what I mean? Have you ever felt that before? I don't know what you would do in this situation, but I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've been doing this the entire time that I've been speaking. Have you noticed? Do you see how I just did it right there? Do you see how I just did it again? Right? The truth is, I don't speak differently to one person than I do to 1,000. Now, when I ask those questions, if you're one-on-one and sitting down with a couple or whatever it is at a door, you're going to have back and forth. And in this situation, I'm not going to have as much dialogue back and forth, but I'm still going to ask those questions and give pause for you to think about it because I want that engagement, right? So you're going to reinforce relatability. You can do that in general conversational speak where you say like, have you ever met somebody like that? What is it? I can't imagine what that would be like. What would you do? You do just normal things. But sometimes you can cater to the person you're in front of, right? You know their situation. You know what they're going through. And so there's somewhere in the story where you can throw it back on them and you can go, this is kind of just like what you're dealing with, isn't it? Right? And you can just connect to them. I'll give you an example. A couple months ago, I was up in Montreal, Canada. I was speaking for a company in direct sales called Nature Sunshine. There's about 1,000 people in the room, about this size, and all of these people are network marketers. They're entrepreneurs. They kind of think differently than most people, right? Similar to you guys in terms of how you approach life. Well, I was telling the story of Mel Fisher. Mel Fisher is the greatest treasure hunter the world's ever known. He's discovered the treasure of the Atocha off the Florida Keys worth over $400 million. Now, before you quit what you're doing and go searching for treasure, he searched the ocean floor every day for 18 years. This is like the ultimate persistence pays off story, right? Well, there's part of the story where I said Mel and his wife Dio made a decision. They closed their shop in California, they picked up their family, they moved across the country to Florida, and they decided to search for treasure full time. Now, when I tell that to normal audiences, I get people who make a face like, what? Who would do that? But I was speaking to this group of network marketers, and this woman in the front row goes, yeah. And I was like, what? But then it just hit me, that's how she thinks, right? And so for just a second, I stopped the story and I said, now most people would think that's crazy, but all of you are network marketing, so you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I get this huge laugh. Why? Because what I was saying is, you are this guy, right? You know you're Mel Fisher. That's why I'm telling you the story. You connect with him. You think like him. You are him. So just reinforcing that relatability. So think about it. You take any story that you're going to tell, and here's the techniques. Before you jump into the story, you're going to ask a you-focused question. And tap into their world with a question, bring them into your world with a story. Then as you start into the story, you're going to place them in the scene. Imagine being here. If you had been here when, so they can start to co-create it. And then maybe once or twice, you're going to reinforce that relatability. Just kind of throw it back on them. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. How would you handle that? Just little things. It's like you're just going to step outside the story and be like, are you with me? And just build that connection, make sure they're digging into the story, and they're going to experience it differently. Those techniques make all the world of difference. They take a little bit of practice, but they will change the way that you tell a story. Now, before I give you the blueprint for a story, before I break down the model, I have to tell you my number one rule, and that's this. If it's not necessary to say, it becomes necessary not to say. We've all heard people tell what should be a 2-minute story in 5 minutes. And you stop listening, don't you? You're like, this actually happened to me at Thanksgiving. I had all my wife's family over, and my brother-in-law was telling a story that was just like tangent after tangent after tangent. It just wasn't going anywhere. And my brother-in-law, another brother-in-law goes, oh, this better be good at the end because this is painful. Like, you said it out loud. And I was like, that's what we're all thinking. But it's just, the more concise you are, the more compelling it becomes. And you have to do that. So how do you take your stories and make them so that they're compelling and dynamic and that you deliver them well? Here's the truth. You have to practice. You have to put some thought into it. I will tell you, there are too many people who think that winging it is a great sales strategy. It is a horrible sales strategy. It might work once or twice. But pay attention to it. Put some effort into it. I hope that one of the things that you get out of this weekend is that you realize what you do is a craft, that you treat it like a profession, that you say, I want to get better at it. Because here's the truth. One thing I know about your industry, whether you stick in this industry and do it for the rest of your life or you go somewhere else, the skills that you will learn here will benefit you everywhere that you go if you really learn them. They will make you better. They will make you more persuasive. They will make you better at connecting with people, and you can use that everywhere that you go. And so treat it that way. Spend some time and put some effort into it. So there's a model for every influential story that's ever told, and it's simple. The model is simply struggle to solution. Struggle to solution. Here's how this works. You hook people with the struggle, you help them with the solution. There is something in our bodies, in our DNA, that we respond to struggle, to conflict, to challenge. It engages us emotionally. Think about a movie, for example. If we were to go to a movie this afternoon and you're excited about it, it's supposed to be incredible, you've seen all the previews, and you sit down, you've got your drink in one hand, your popcorn in the other. Do you see how I just placed you in the scene? But it ends up being about a guy that just merrily skips through life. No ups, no downs, no challenge, no struggle. Everything works out perfect. We would all leave and go, that was the stupidest movie I've ever seen in my life, wouldn't we? Here's the problem, though. That's how we often tell stories in business. Think about most business stories. They all sound the same. We say, you know what, we're great, and we've always been great, and we'll always be great, and if you work with us, that'd be great. And most people are like, great, right? Because what's engaging about that? What's real about that? You know, want to know where I learned this lesson? My 3-year-old son taught me this lesson. I have 4 kids. They're now 12, 10, 8, and 5. I'm from Utah. And my boys, they're now 10 and 8. They always love me to tell them stories at night. And so a couple of years ago, they were on a Smurfs kick. Do you guys know Smurfs? Smurfs are like these little blue people that live in a forest. There's a bad guy named Gargamel who almost catches them, and then they escape. That is the premise of every Smurf story ever told. I had been making up Smurf stories for like a month, and I was sick of it. I have no idea how else Gargamel could let these stupid Smurfs go. I was like, catch them, kill them, just be done. Like, let's be over with this. I don't know. And I got back from a trip, and I'm tired, and my boys are like, Dad, can we have one more Smurf story? And I was like, no, guys, we're done. And they're like, come on, Dad, we'll never ask again. Just one more. You know that's true. And so I told them the dumbest Smurf story ever told. I said, okay, the Smurfs woke up, and it was Smurfette's birthday, and the baker guy made a cake, and they sang happy birthday, okay, go to bed. And my 3-year-old goes, that's not a story, there's no bad guy. And I said, what? And he goes, it's not a story without a bad guy, it doesn't count, I want a real story. And I can't help but wonder if there's sometimes you're standing across the doorway from somebody and they're going, that's not a real story. Tell me the truth. Like, be honest with me. Because a real story is struggles to solution. You exist to solve problems. There is struggle there. There is challenge. There is conflict. Your product fixes a problem for them. It provides a solution. You, in the recruiting process, you weren't always the top salesperson. I promise you, you had your struggles and you went through it. You can connect better around struggle and then show them a solution. That's how stories work. There's struggle to solution, and the pushback I'll get from people is like, okay, Ty, but I'm new and I haven't arrived yet. Well, welcome to life. None of us have. I want you to think about this. Solution is more directional than it is positional. Think about how you cast a vision. If you're going to recruit somebody on here's what we could do this summer, you're not talking about where we are. You're talking about where you're going. You're saying here's where we are. These are the things we have to do, but this is where we're going. That's struggle to solution. And when you tell a struggle to solution story, you hook people in emotionally and you lead them where you want to go. That might sound simple, but I promise you, if you think about the stories that you're telling, you're often missing this equation. Stories need to be struggle to solution. Now, before we move on from kind of how you craft stories and how you deliver information, I want to give you one more piece of advice. The advice is actually from Joseph Stalin. I don't know if you've ever received advice from Joseph Stalin before, but I wouldn't listen to most of it. But in this instance, what he said is very morbid, and it's also very true. Joseph Stalin said, the death of one man is a tragedy, the death of a million is a statistic. Now just let that sink in for a second, because that's pretty morbid. But what he was talking about is how we process information. Here's the thing. There's something about us, our human nature, that we think big statistics, big numbers, there's a shock and awe effect, and so that's going to have a bigger impact on people, and it actually has the opposite effect. You can use shock and awe numbers, but you need to bring it down to a specific story for that to connect with somebody. Think about it from this standpoint. My mom, for example, just broke her ankle a couple of weeks ago. That has had way more emotional impact on me than mass genocide in Africa. Now, I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's true. And so if you're going to use big statistics, big numbers in your presentation, that's fine, but then give me one person's story to show me how those statistics play out, because I can connect with that one person. That's where stories become effective. That's where stories become the key to taking that presentation where you take a big concept and you make it something that somebody can grab onto and move forward with. Does that make sense? Okay, let me give you a couple of tools before we wrap up here. Because we've talked about kind of the mindset, right? How you approach it. We talked about the skill set, how you develop and craft a story. I want to give you a couple of tools. These tools are going to help you to enhance a story. They're going to make a story more compelling, more dynamic, more memorable. I'll just give you a couple of them, some of my favorites. The first one's dialogue. Dialogue is an incredible tool. Here's why. Most stories are told in narration. It's like a book report. It's like an outsider looking in going, I went here, then this happened, then this happened. And it's really hard to connect emotionally to a book report. Dialogue automatically puts it in present tense. It allows you to experience it and feel it and hear it differently. Mark Twain had a great quote. He said, "Don't tell me that the lady screamed. Bring her on stage and let her scream." So the question isn't should you use dialogue, it's how do you, well, let me illustrate what I mean, because some of you probably are like, okay, what do you mean by dialogue? I'm going to tell you the same story twice. I'm going to tell you the story first using narration only, and then I'm going to tell you the story using dialogue, and I want you to hear the difference between the two. I want you to see what I'm talking about with this tool. This is not to make light of a subject at all. This is just a good example. So I could tell you the story in narration by saying, a friend of mine was just diagnosed with cancer. Now, using dialogue, I could say, my friend called me yesterday. And she goes, Ty, I have cancer. I don't know what I'm going to do. Do you hear the difference between the two? You see, dialogue allows me a lot of liberty as the storyteller to bring in tonation, to change posture, personality, to bring attitude, like all the things that you want to make this story really connect. So the question is, how do you use dialogue? Dialogue has two express purposes. Dialogue is used for humor and impact. That's what it's used for. Here's a homework assignment for you. Go on Netflix, pull up any stand-up comedian you want, watch their special, and I promise you that when they get a laugh, they are using dialogue. They don't tell you about something, they act it out. They say it as that person. Two great ones that I would recommend, anything that Mike Birbiglia does, favorite comedian of all time, he's incredible, great storyteller, and Ryan Hamilton has a great program on Netflix right now. Check out any comedian, you're going to see that's going to be true. Second thing, it's used for impact. I want you to think about this for a minute. A couple of minutes ago, you got to hear Stephen Covey, one of the greatest thinkers of our time, who, by the way, passed away 5 years ago. You got to hear Stephen Covey give you some of maybe the best advice you will ever hear in your life, and the only reason you got to do so is because I chose to use dialogue in my story. It's different than if I would have just told you about it. It has more impact. Okay, so dialogue is an incredible tool that can enhance stories. The second one I want you to think about is details. I realized a minute ago I told you that if it's not necessary to say, it becomes necessary not to say. And now I'm saying use details. So what gives? Details that have to do with time, location, amount, numbers. Those details need to be in because they make something more tangible. You can see it, touch it, feel it. You can experience it differently. Let me go back to that Mel Fisher story. Remember Mel Fisher that I mentioned, the treasure hunter? When I'm telling that story, at the part where Mel discovers the treasure, this is how I actually tell it. I say, one day a magnometer indicated something down on the seabed. And two divers dove down to see what they had found, and they found they were sitting on an entire reef of silver bars. They found it. They found the mother lode. All in all, they found 700 silver bars that weighed 70 pounds apiece. Can you imagine? They found 250 gold bars. They found 2,500 emeralds, 3,500 other gems. They found dozens of bronze cannons, hundreds of pounds of heavy gold bits, disks, and chain, and thousands of other artifacts. Estimates put the wrecks valued over $400 million. Or I could have simply said they found a really big treasure. Kind of different, right? The details kind of make it a little bit more dynamic. You can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it, right? So those details bring it to life. And so those details around location, time, amount, those things need to be in there. Think about how they sell weight loss, right? They don't say, some people lost some weight, right? They give it something specific. I actually saw an ad the other day that said lose between 5 and 300 pounds. Like, I don't think I want to lose the whole 300, but, I thought it was fantastic. Okay, let me give you one more tool to think about, metaphors. When I say metaphors, I'm not talking about the difference between metaphors, object lessons, analogies, similes. I'm saying comparison, right? Here's the thing. Not every story is going to be a metaphor-based story. I want you to think about the toolbox from this standpoint. If you were to go and work on a job, you grab your tools, and you don't necessarily need every tool in the toolbox for every job, right? Sometimes you need a saw, sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need all of it. But not every story is going to have every one of these tools. They're there when you need them, if you can understand them, right? So some stories need metaphors. When you're explaining a product, when you're sharing something that people don't understand, it's a new concept. Sometimes a metaphor is the best way to bridge that gap. You compare the known to the unknown. The story that I shared with Tommy just a few minutes ago up on stage, that was a metaphor-based story. I was comparing myself, the unknown entrepreneur, to Bill Gates, the known entrepreneur, and hoping to bridge that gap so Tommy would go, yeah, I'll listen, right? So that I could engage him a different way. Metaphors can be extremely powerful if you use them. Now, let's recap for just a minute, because I just threw a lot of information at you. Here's the thing. I hope you understand how much content you're going to get this weekend. This is just the beginning. We're starting off with storytelling. It's an essential skill. It's something that you need to learn. I think it starts with the mindset. I think as you approach those situations, your focus has to be on the audience. It's about them, guys. And so we have to be able to connect. That should be our goal, is connection. It's not perfection. We have to engage them. How do you do that? There's lots of tools to be able to engage them. You develop that. That's a skill. You have to find your voice, that balance between credibility and relatability, right? Because people do business with people they know, like, trust, and value. You have to show up in that way. When you do that, let's start to understand that if we tell a story that is struggle to solution, no, we don't tell a story, we relive a story, right? When you relive a story, you allow other people to relive it with you. And so you bring them into it. You can ask that you-focused question. You can place them in the scene, right? If you had been here when, imagine being here. You can reinforce that relatability, have that conversational tone. Remember that idea from Joseph Stalin that you share big numbers, but you bring it down to one story so people can connect to it. And then we talked about dialogue, details, and metaphors, tools that can make your stories come alive. If I had more time, I'd jump into more details and give you even more tools and some of the things. But hopefully, I've given you a couple of ideas that you can grab onto and go, okay, I can use that. I'd love to connect with all of you. If you're active on social media, find me. You can find me under Ty Bennett anywhere. How many of you listen to podcasts? Anybody listen to podcasts? Check out the Relevant Leadership Podcast. My podcast, I interview all sorts of different people, salespeople, leaders, CEOs. Some of them are just me sharing some ideas that I share with audiences all over the world. Check it out. If you're interested in diving deeper into storytelling, I do have copies of The Power of Storytelling that will be for sale. Back here, if you go through that, there's a booth just to the left. I don't mean to brag, but I will sign it for you. And my signature goes for like 13 cents on eBay, so it might be worth it. It's fun to be here with you. To wrap up, I want to share one more story with you. It only seems fitting. Now I kind of feel like the magician that just gave you all the secrets, and now you're going to be like watching for it. But here's the thing. As I tell this story, the truth of the matter is I'm going to use everything that I just shared with you. You're going to see a struggle to solution story. You're going to see me use dialogue to bring the character to life. You're going to see, I'll just tell you, I'm going to use the word imagine to place you in the scene. I'm going to go back and forth to reinforce relatability, just all the things that I just shared with you, because here's the truth. All of you have incredible products. You have great stories to tell. The difference between those who sell a lot and those who sell little is how they tell those stories. I found that in every industry that I work with, whoever tells the best story wins. Is that not true? And so learning how to tell that story incredibly well is important. At the end of World War I, there was a gentleman named Michael Dowling who was invited to go over to Germany to speak to a group of wounded soldiers. He made the trip over to Germany, and imagine the scene. Imagine walking into a room where you see dozens of young men lying on cots. Some of them had been shot, some of them were amputees. Every one of them had lost hope in their eyes, and Michael empathized with these young men. He was really emotional, so he kind of stood back and he waited for his turn to speak. And when he was introduced to them, he stood up in front of them and he started his speech by saying this. He said, "I want you to know that anything is possible. I hope that you dream big dreams because you have a bright future ahead of you and the potential to achieve anything that you desire." Well, the soldiers weren't in very good spirits and they started to boo him. And the booing got so severe that Michael finally stopped and he grabbed a chair and he sat down. And then unexpectedly, he reached down and he removed his prosthetic right leg and he put it on the floor. And then he removed his prosthetic left leg and he put it on the floor. And then he took off his prosthetic right arm and he removed his prosthetic left hand. You see, what the soldiers didn't know about him was that when he was 14 years old, he was riding on the back of a wagon in a snowstorm. Something happened. He fell off the wagon. By the time his parents realized he was missing and came back to get him, he had severe frostbite, to the point that they had to amputate both of his legs, his right arm at the shoulder and his left hand at the wrist. Can you imagine what that would do to a 14-year-old kid? He empathized with those soldiers because he knew exactly what they were going through. He had lost all hope in his eyes too. But somehow, with an amazing attitude and the help of prosthetic limbs, he went on to lead an incredible life. He was married, graduated from college, he had 5 kids, and he climbed the corporate ladder until he became the president of a successful bank in Minnesota. Now, sitting there, quite literally a stump of a man, he started his speech over again by saying the exact same thing. He said, "I want you to know that anything is possible. I hope that you dream big dreams because you have a bright future ahead of you and the potential to achieve anything that you desire." To me, that's got to be the greatest speech that's ever been given. And his message is what I want to leave you with. Anything is possible. I hope that each of you take in the next 3 days, that you really listen to the speakers that Sam's lined out. They're incredible speakers. A couple of them are some of my best friends. They're unbelievable. You will learn a ton if you'll dive in. I hope that you meet different people. I hope that you just take in every piece of this that you can, so that you go back and you become a different person, so that you can have a bigger year than you had last year, so that you can make a bigger impact, so that you can provide better for your family, so that you can go and take advantage of the opportunity that this industry provides. You have incredible potential to go and do incredible things, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you very much.